with our coalition partners as one voice into June 18, 2022 for the Mass Poor People's Low-Wage Workers Assembly and Moral March on Washington to the polls.
To the polls.
This is a declaration of power of the poor and the low-wealth people and our moral allies to say this system is killing all of us. We can't, we won't, we refuse to be silent anymore. You will hear and see the impact on April 2nd here in North Carolina for the Moral March on Raleigh and June 18, the Mass Poor People's Low-Wage Workers Assembly in D.C. Individuals impacted by the horrible decisions this nation's politicians are making and are hell-bent to continue doing so. By prioritizing corporations and weakening our democracy and voices. We want you to join us, and you can reach us at ppc-nc.org, poorpeoplescampaign.org, or North Carolina at poorpeoplescampaign.org. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right.
Forward together.
Now one step back.
Last night, virtually, in Alabama, in Georgia, and Florida, and Tennessee, thousands of people gathered online for the Moral Monday tours that are leading to the Mass Poor People's Low-Wage Workers Assembly Moral March on Washington and to the polls, July 18th, 2022. June 18th, 2022. There are 10 of those stops that are happening across the country, from New York to California, from Alabama to West Virginia. And on April the 2nd, on a Saturday right here in North Carolina, South Carolina, West Virginia, and Virginia. People from all over will be joining here, mobilizing people towards that date in June 18th, which is a declaration and not a day. It is a call to action. It is to say that the 140 million poor and low wealth people will not be silent anymore, who now make up 33% of the electorate in the country and 45% of the electorate whenever there is an election for president in a state that is less than 3%. In every state where the margin of victory is less than 3%, poor and low wealth people make up 45% of the electorate.
Wow.
And by poor and low wealth, we mean white and we black. The truth of the matter is, 30% of white people are poor and low wealth, but that's 66 million of the 140 million.
Wow.
60.9% of black people are poor and low wealth. That's 26 million people. 68% of Latinos, 68% of natives. The reality is some 31 million people in this country make less than a living wage. Almost 50% of the workers, not black workers in this country, this state, make less than a living wage of $15 an hour.
Shame.
So why would we be talking today about this when we come to talk about what happened in the Supreme Court on yesterday? Because oftentimes we make the mistake in this moment of declaring that voter suppression is just about Jim Crow Point 2. It's not. This is not Jim Crow Point 2. This is James Crow Esquire. This is an attempt to shut down the progressive voice in this country. Surely it attacks black people, but anything that attacks and undermines the rights of black people, racism also has a collateral damage on disabled people.
That's right.
And women.
That's right.
And our white brothers and sisters who are poor and low wealth across this nation. And we have to start seeing that. And the reason why we're so engaged is because you cannot separate the persons that vote to suppress the vote from the people who also vote against a living wage.
That's right.
Same legislature. Same legislators that vote to deny health care and Medicaid expansion are the same ones that vote to suppress the vote or to gerrymander the vote. The same legislators that vote against women and vote against Latinos and immigrants and the LGBTQ community and vote to lessen unemployment benefits and vote against paid leave. If you check their record, they are the same persons that vote to suppress the vote. They do not vote to suppress and gerrymander the vote just because they don't like black people. They vote to gerrymander and suppress the vote because they don't like progress.
That's right.
They don't like justice.
right.
They don't like abiding in the Constitution. It happens under the guise of race. But as Dr. King once said, we better understand, 1965 at the end of the Selma to Montgomery March, Dr. King said that the system of segregation and voter suppression was a stratagem, he called it a stratagem, by the bourbon class, the aristocracy in the South, to deliberately keep poor and low-wealth Negroes and poor and low-wealth white people from coming together, forming a voting bloc with power that could reset and rechange and change the economic architecture of the nation. If you don't do that analysis, you don't really understand what's going on.
That's right.
And why there is so much attempt to control the vote, because the same people that want to control the vote, they want to control the budget of the General Assembly.
That's right.
They want to control the $23 trillion gross domestic product of the nation.
That's right.
They want to control the wealth of this nation. And they do not care if millions suffer with poor and low wealth. Even in the midst of COVID, billionaires have made $2 trillion, while 8 million people have fell into poverty. And so we come here with that analysis. Last evening, the North Carolina Supreme Court issued a full decision in Harper versus Hall, 2020-21 redistricting challenge. Now, we've been battling this media since 2010. Since 2010, and every attempt that has been made to gerrymander this. In fact, that's how they first got supermajority. The Republicans did in the General Assembly. It wasn't that they won it, they cheated. They engaged in voter suppression, and they engaged in racialized gerrymandering that hurt all people in this state. They created what we called an impoverished democracy. But last night, the General Assembly said beyond a reasonable doubt, that what was done in this partisan gerrymandering was violating the Constitution of this state. And it was violating the rights of black voters, listen now, Latino voters, and low-income voters. That's what they ruled last night, all 3 of those. Black voters, Latino voters, and low-income voters, particularly in eastern North Carolina, who were targeted by this latest effort to exclude certain voices from our democracy. It is in essence, it was an immoral and unconstitutional attempt to exclude the people. I never will forget, Caitlin, when we were in court some years ago, and the judge asked in the Fourth Circuit, why is it that people in North Carolina don't want some people to vote?
That's right.
And the reason we can fight here in North Carolina, and we don't see what's happening in Alabama and Georgia and some other places where a supermajority General Assembly has no pushback at the Supreme Court, is because here in the Moral Monday movement, we fought back and we voted.
That's
and
right.
we voted and
That's
we voted
right.
to shift who was in the governor's office, and we voted to make sure that the Supreme Court was not just run by people who did not care about the Constitution. It's not about whether they care about Democrat or Republican, it's whether they care about the Constitution.
That's right.
Now, this decision that happened last night came hours after Caitlin come over, where Caitlin and lawyers representing the NAACP did a historic challenge, and their challenge is basically saying that if you win your power using unconstitutional gerrymandering, listen now, if you win your power using unconstitutional gerrymandering, then you cannot, with that power, change the Constitution.
That's right.
Yes.
Did you hear what I said?
Yes.
That media, you need to get this. That's what is being argued now. If you use your power to create supermajorities and cheat and win through gerrymandering and voter suppression, you cannot then take that same power and rewrite the Constitution in your favor. No, 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 no. Because it is wrong. It is a form of no, and it says no group of legislature has the right to racially gerrymander maps that infect more than 2/3 of the districts of this state and then steal that power. That's what they did in 2018. They knew they had lost the right to call themselves the people's representative, but they used their waning days in power to try to change the Constitution to add a discriminatory barrier to the right to vote and a regressive tax cap. Do you see how they connected economics? I want the media to get this. It's not just about black folk. They decided to change the Constitution. They decided to use their power to do two things: to add a discriminatory barrier to the right to vote and to put a regressive tax cap in place that would hurt the power of the next generation and the ability of the government to do what the government is required to do. And that is to care for the least of these, care for the downtrodden, and lift up the whole of society.
That's right.
This week also, the North Carolina General Assembly now, because of the ruling last night, is meeting to redraw the North Carolina voting districts. They got an order of the court. That's good.
Good hand clap, bro.
But there's a problem. The General Assembly now is trying to do a backroom compromise.
Shame.
The people fought the battle, and we call out even Democrats on this.
That's right.
And now they want to do a backroom deal. We need public hearings.
Yes.
That's right.
If the court said that this is unconstitutional, before those maps are redrawn, we need the voices of the people to be heard.
Say it,
That's right.
say it.
The voices of the people in those districts.
Yeah.
Don't rush and do a compromise. Let's do it right and make sure it's constitutional.
That's right.
And a constitutional drawing would include the voices of the people. The voices of the people. All the people.
All the people.
Now, lastly, I come also today to speak on behalf of the right of the people to make our voices heard, because on January 25th, our legal team appealed to the North Carolina Supreme Court to take up a case that has my name attached to it, but it has really nothing to do with me alone. It's so much bigger than me. The case arises from charges of trespass against me and others who were engaging in First Amendment rights, public speech, fighting for health care for all people. In that building, we were told that somebody was disturbed by what we were saying, and therefore we had to be quiet or had to stop. I asked the police officers, what is the decimal level for First Amendment? Just tell me, how loud can you be when you're exercising your First Amendment right? They said, we don't know. I knew I was in trouble then. But they also said, you have to stop. And we said, but wait a minute, just because somebody doesn't like what we're saying, they can't just complain.
That's right.
Because that means you could be whispering, as far as that's concerned. And so they arrested us. They ended up, some persons got community service, and I chose for the state, not for William Barber. Because when I engaged in civil disobedience, like all of these good people, we don't mind going to jail. If that was the sentence, because when you engage in nonviolent civil disobedience, you're willing to take the penalty. But what we're not willing to do
That's right.
is to allow persons to take our First Amendment rights
That's right.
in a public building
Yeah.
without a fight. I've gone all over this country. In Wisconsin, they stayed in the State House for weeks. Voices loud, and nobody got arrested and charged. In New York, same thing. I've gone all over the country in other places and seen people exercise their right to vote in state houses loud, long, and with great voice. And you do not see people being arrested because they're too loud. I said to the courts, I was using my preacher's voice. God gave me that. And I don't intend to shut that up for nobody.
That's right.
But this is bigger than me.
Yeah.
It's about whether these people can be shut up. It's about whether our children can be shut up. It's about whether folk can hide behind the walls of the General Assembly and never hear the voice of the people.
Yeah.
And even if the case comes out guilty, we'll still be back.
That's right.
Because if they do break laws, if they violate the Constitution, nonviolent civil disobedience says we have the authority and the right to break an unjust law. When that law is prohibiting the justice first given by God and also given by the Constitution.
That's right.
We bring all of these cases, and we were an amicus on these cases about gerrymandering. We're an amicus brief on the other cases that's going before the Supreme Court. We bring them all because the Constitution of North Carolina says that everything that government is created for the good of the whole. In fact, let me quote a little bit for you. The Constitution of North Carolina says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all persons are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, the enjoyment of the fruit of their own labor, and the pursuit of happiness. The Constitution of North Carolina says that the first duty of a Christian and civilized state is to care for those who are in need of benevolence.
That's right.
That's what the Constitution says. That's what we expect. That's what we demand. And that's what we will fight for right on down to our last breath. So we invite you to join us on August the 2nd when 5 states join us here on the tour. April said, Lord have mercy. Y'all have April the 2nd. And then, I'm a little rusty in North Carolina, you know. April the 2nd, and then June 18th for the mass Poor People's Low Wage Workers Assembly Moral March on Washington and to the poll, the largest gathering in history of poor and low wealth people, religious leaders, and their advocates, saying that we will shift the moral narrative in this country, we will build power, and we will put before this country a third Reconstruction agenda for the saving of the soul of America. God bless you.
That's right.
Caitlin?
Good afternoon. My name is Caitlin Swain, and I'm co-director of Forward Justice, based in Durham, North Carolina. We are a law, policy, and strategy center dedicated to advancing racial justice in the U.S. South. We believe that if you can change the South, you can change the nation. And we stand with Reverend Barber today, so proud of what the South, what North Carolina is telling the nation today. What we're telling the nation today is that the rule of law matters. And the rule of law here in North Carolina is the North Carolina Constitution, a powerful, sacred document that this movement, the people who are gathered here today, have been fighting to make real long before today. But yesterday's ruling was a historic ruling. It was a ruling that spoke to the importance of state constitutions in a time when our democracy is under attack nationally and in this state. It was a ruling that spoke to the importance of an independent judiciary, a judiciary unafraid to speak to what the Constitution dictates here in this state. And it was a ruling that speaks to the power of the people. The people who have gathered here today, who have been saying with one voice, united, our voices matter. We will not be excluded from this democracy. We want a representative democracy, a democracy that represents all of us, that gives each of us a voice in the direction of our future. Also also yesterday, and I am so proud to be here today to speak to this, we were a part of giving a historic oral argument in front of the North Carolina Supreme Court, as Reverend Barber said, representing the mighty North Carolina NAACP, and so many of our partners who stood up and said an unconstitutionally constituted General Assembly, a General Assembly that relied on racially gerrymandered districts in one of the most widespread gerrymanders encountered by any federal court, and that is the quote of the federal court, that General Assembly would build a supermajority through those maps that they gained illegally, and then use that illegally gained supermajority to change our North Carolina Constitution. We said, no, that is wrong. This movement said, no, we need to bring a challenge to this, because we will not allow for the people's sovereignty, the right of the people to write our Constitution, to have representative democracy in this state be stolen from us because of the timeline of these court cases. So we are so proud of Kim Hunter, the full team that gave the arguments yesterday in front of the North Carolina Supreme Court. And we believe that what you saw last evening in the full Harper v. Hall decision is a harbinger of what is to come. And that is decisions from this North Carolina Supreme Court, and we hope courts across this nation saying that our constitutions matter, that we are going to have a protected democracy, a representative democracy, and a fair democracy.
That's right.
And then I also just want to say, as I close, we know that the eyes of the nation are on this state right now.
That's right.
That the eyes of the nation are on this state because the way that North Carolina goes, so goes the nation.
That's
right.
As the General Assembly behind us is considering what steps to take next in their effort to redraw these maps, we ask them to think not about their political futures, not about what they want as individual politicians, but what do the people deserve in North Carolina? The people deserve fair maps, representative maps, and they deserve a voice in that process. So thank you so much, Reverend Barber and Anna Blackburn, all of you for allowing us to be here today.
Thank you.
We're going to take questions now. One more piece I want to just give for history's sake is the Constitution that gave the foundations, the jurisprudence foundations upon which the lawyers argued, grew out of the Reconstruction era of this country between 1868 and 1898.
Yes.
And that Constitution was written when black and white people came together after slavery. That's to be remembered. That's the Constitution, that fusion Constitution that still speaks today, that still stands today, that still gives us direction today. And lastly, and especially to these politicians, because too often the people win a victory and then the folk who hold office compromise on the people's victory. They want the people to vote, but then they want to go in the back room and decide what the maps look like. Bring it out in the open. Let the people speak. Give the people public hearings. We didn't win this victory for you to then go behind closed doors and cut deals as to, as she said, Democrat or Republican. How you're going to survive. This is really about the future and the survival of this state and this country and even the South. As North Carolina goes, so much of the rest of the nation goes, especially the South. Any questions from members of the media for Anna or for Attorney Swain or for myself? Yes, and you are?
I'm Will Dorn from the News and Observer.
Hey, my friend.
I was wondering, with these maps, we've heard obviously a lot about the political implications of the maps, but I'm wondering about the policy implications.
Yeah.
You talked about, so if we have new elections with more fair maps, what are some of the policy solutions that you would like to see come about?
Well, if you have fair maps, and fair elections. There was a time some years ago where it said that you had more progressives vote, but you had less progressives win because of gerrymandering. That's what gerrymandering does. You can have actually more progressive vote, but then they're gerrymandered in a way that they have less impact on who actually sits in the General Assembly. But with progressive maps and fair maps, then you get a fair hearing on health care. Right now, 500,000 North Carolinians could have health care. Not 500,000 black North Carolinians, but 500,000 North Carolinians if this state would simply expand Medicaid. We have not done that in the midst of even COVID because of who has the majority in the General Assembly. This state, 70% plus of North Carolinians want a living wage. That's what the people want. They want a living wage. They want $15 living wage, minimum living wage. Polls tell it. But when you have an unjust and a gerrymandered General Assembly, particularly when it's gerrymandered in an extremist way, that blocks any real hearing on those matters. You change the maps, you have a fairer debate, we get to living wages. We have a different debate about how we deal with our Latino brothers and sisters and immigrants. I mean, policy, women, whether or not we have paid leave, the amount of money that's put into public education. This is not just about black and white. Race, see, is the original sin. It is the penetration point. But anybody that studies race and racism really knows that policy racism, wherever implemented, also hurts poor white folk and low-income white folk and brown folk and native people. And we have to understand that as we analyze this. This is about policy. Everything they're doing is because they want to control that in the Congress is controlling the $21 trillion gross domestic product. Over here is controlling that bill. How many $1 billion? I don't know the exact number, but the $1 billion state budget. Because they want to control the money, they want to control the power, and they want to pass policies that benefit corporations and the profit-driven people. You check them out. Every policy, those who are against health care get a whole lot of money from corporate interests. Those who are against living wages, a whole lot of money from corporate interests, right? So the battle over voting rights, the battle for the people's voice, the battle against gerrymandering is a racism and a classism battle.
Yes.
It's both and, it's not either or.
That's right.
Any others? Well, God bless you and thank you all so much. Thank you so much. I wish we could hug during COVID.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm trying to keep COVID safe. You know how that is.
Barber.
Hey, let me put my map on my.